If there is anything good or redemptive that can be said about the climate crisis and the droughts experienced worldwide, it's that things which have been resting under the cover of water are being revealed again. Personally, as an archaeology enthusiast, I find this enchanting. The treasures of the deep rushing to the surface to present themselves like a gift, like an invitation to the past. Instead of "come find me," these relics are announcing, "Here I am." Even from my armchair perch, it feels like I'm pulling back a curtain to reveal a surprise. In 1929, the New York Times reported that a drought had exposed the ruins of a castle dating from 1709, right in the middle of the Danube. And almost 100 years later, it's quite possible that the diminished Danube showcased this same castle. And the river is giving up other treasures as well. For example, Nazi ships that had been scuttled to thwart the encroaching Soviet forces and were presumably lost to history, these emerged after 80 years on the riverbed. In Italy, the parched Tiber River has exposed the foundation of an early Roman bridge, while in Spain, the drought has uncovered a rock installation that is reminiscent of Stonehenge. We can't know whether these revelations will remain visible when the water returns and the drought relents. But now that we know that they are there, we can take note of what has been unveiled. Archaeologists for their historic value, sightseers for their online album of unusual sights, and navigators for the safety of those on the water. Our lives also have their hidden aspects, internal artifacts, and even relics which influence us sight unseen. This holy day, the New Year, is all about making the hidden apparent, so that we can measure how well we fulfilled our promises to ourselves, to others, and to God, and where we may need to chart a new path. Without such insight, navigating our lives could be like sailing the Danube without a map of the hazards that lurk beneath. Once our interior life is charted, we can move forward with more intention. Rather than posing a danger, our personal landmarks create an internal narrative by which we measure ourselves. For some, it is the birth of a child, or witnessing a significant event such as the Holocaust, or the birth of Israel, or landing on the moon, or even 9/11. They're often the touchstones of an individual portrait, marking a clear milestone in one's life. And it is almost a universal marker now to use the pandemic as a dividing line, pre and post, including the difficulties of illness and loss that we've experienced along the way. Through accomplishments and struggles, challenges and times of gratitude, however we take the measure of our lives, these personal landmarks help keep us oriented to move forward with purpose and integrity. Abraham Lincoln notably said, "A compass will point true north from where you're standing, but it's got no advice about the swamps and the deserts and the chasms that you'll encounter along the way. If we're heedless of obstacles and sink in the swamp, what's the use of knowing true north?" And this is true of every year. Reflection and judgment begins with oneself. But this year, we cannot be satisfied only with a personal examination of our own integrity, when the integrity of our nation cries out for us to help as well. Our tradition counsels us repeatedly: know where you come from, know where you are going, and before whom you must stand. And while the sages did not mention this explicitly, we have to contextualize this self-knowledge, taking note of the forces around us which affect us and color our choices and responsibilities. And so we must do more than just attend to ourselves as the new year begins. Let us also attend to the broken world around us. Just as we seek to search out and correct the faults and errors within ourselves, we need to see what is lacking in our nation, namely the perils facing democracy now that they are increasingly being revealed, as well as our individual role in protecting this sacred inheritance. Here are some of the highlights of what Jews have contributed to democracy. Thousands of years ago, our tradition urged, "Justice, justice you shall pursue," and it gave us the mechanisms to do so by creating a model for justice through the appointment of judges. As Deuteronomy instructs, appoint impartial judges who will carry out the law, and in doing so, the Bible asserts, evil will be swept out of the land. Impartial judges who won't be tempted by bribes, as we will read in Kedoshim, the Holiness Code on Yom Kippur. Impartial judges who won't factor political and social influence into their rulings, who will use their authority in the service of justice. A brand of justice based on facts, nothing less. Elsewhere, the Torah instructs us regarding justice with this guidance: you shall act in accordance with the instructions given you and the ruling handed down, without deviating to the right or the left, affirming that accepting a judicial ruling is not up to the discretion of the plaintiff, just as one can't shop around for a judge who would provide a ruling that we would prefer. Pulling back the veil of time, these ancient directives have provided a stable infrastructure, stability of the law, an ancient biblical principle. Through Supreme Court nomination hearings, and more recently as referenced by Justice Elena Kagan when she spoke here through the Stryker Cultural Center, we have all learned about that essential principle of stare decisis, or the stability of the law. Democracy depends on it. To put it simply, we Jews have provided enduring principles to create a foundation upon which democracy stands. And we have found protection under its banner. When democracy has faltered elsewhere in the world, we have become its victims. 2,000 years ago, our ancestors taught, "Pray for the welfare of the government, but for the fear thereof, people would swallow each other alive." Government can be the stabilizing force which enforces equity and impartiality and justice. And what has democracy given us as Jews? Landmark moments from the earliest days of the Republic, beginning with George Washington's letter to the Touro Synagogue, in which he declared, "Our nation gives to bigotry no sanction, to persecution no assistance," specifically honoring our freedom to practice our faith. 80 years ago, as the United States was about to enter World War II, President Franklin Roosevelt wanted to send a compelling message to the world about American values. But his most important audience was at home. He assured our nation that Americans would always be entitled to 4 freedoms: freedom of speech and freedom of worship, both of which are protected by the First Amendment, freedom from want, and freedom from fear, all essential for a thriving democracy. Democracy has kept us afloat, binding us into a nation anchored in a common vision and purpose. In democracy's public square, we have opportunities for civil engagement and discourse, a forum to share ideas, a space to disagree with one another without finding each other disagreeable, a framework for conversation. As children, when we were taught civics, we learned what was expected of us individually to create an America for all. That lesson was delivered, packaged with an optimism that tomorrow would be better, and that each one of us had a responsibility to our community and to the nation. We were responsible, each one of us, to keep aloft the aspirational vision of bringing a better future. But now, that belongs to an earlier time. Every day we learn more about the ways in which democracy is at risk, and with it, the stability that America has afforded our community for 246 years. According to Julia Lipton of the Pollinger Family Foundation on Democracy, the welfare of the Jewish community is the canary in the coal mine for all marginalized communities. If we are at risk, so many are even more vulnerable. Like the shallow Danube, worrisome hazards which used to lie hidden beneath the buoyant tides of democracy are now exposed. Among them, misogyny, in bold, unnuanced terms, as most recently expressed in the Dobbs decision, diminishing women and all who identify as women, by denying half the nation autonomy over our own health and bodily decisions. White nationalism, which has infected politics at large, from voter suppression to immigration to decisions about public health. Economic disparities, racial inequities, and unrelenting prejudice, as protested by the Black Lives Matters movement. Redistricting and redlining, resulting in growing anti-immigration sentiments and legislation. These assaults on decency, among others, though not new, were largely held in check by the framework of democracy. As they have broken through in the ugliest ways, they mar our sense of who we thought we were, who we hoped to be, and now what we hope will remain, because the very idea of America is in jeopardy. I don't want to sound naive, as if America was always Mayberry, Mom, and Walton Mountain. In the most recent Ken Burns documentary called The U.S. and the Holocaust, he captures the prolific anti-Semitism which emerged here in force as Jews in Germany and Europe were blamed for the very hatred heaped upon us. It wasn't all apple pie. But the virulent forces which were defeated in Europe brought an awareness to the world and to us that we would not tolerate them. And yet, who would ever have imagined that some facets of mainstream politics today could be aligned with opinions which could easily be mistaken for the very ideals we fought against then? There is a word for this corrosive erosion. Political scientists call it anocracy, a term which is given to governments that are only partially democratic. And we need to pay attention to this damaging transformation because anocracy is the shipwreck of democracy. Did you know that until the January 6th insurrection, the US was considered the longest-standing democracy? And since then, the Center for Systemic Peace, which assigns a rating to the health of democracies worldwide, has downgraded the US to an anocracy. Barbara F. Walter, a political scientist, author of How Civil Wars Start and How to Stop Them, and who serves on the CIA's Political Instability Task Force, works to identify factors in other nations that lead to instability and violence. Yet her expertise abroad brought her back to analyze what is going on here at home. Regarding the United States, she warned, if we were to continue to become less democratic, for example, if voting rights were suppressed even more, if one party tried to overturn the results of an election, the United States rating would be downgraded even further. Because of all political systems, anocracies are at the greatest risk of political violence. The rating, of course, is merely a reflection of the activities which brought it to bear. According to the task force, one of the most significant signs of risk is when groups start to organize along racial, religious, and ethnic lines to form parties, which then seek to gain political power in order to exclude everyone else, everyone who is not like them. Such groups are motivated by their own waning authority, she observed. As society becomes more diverse, and those of non-dominant backgrounds take advantage of opportunities to improve their lives, the insurgent groups are itching to force down others so that they can remain on top. We saw this in miniature in Charlottesville. Remember the refrain, "Jews shall not replace us?" And in so many other acts of violence, whether anti-Semitic or targeting other ethnicities. We are experiencing a drought for democracy. Whatever we believe, we have to believe in this, because democracy with a capital D allows us the freedom to hold and live out our own beliefs. These days ask so much of us as we judge ourselves and remember that we have the power to act in ways that bring change to our own lives. Let us remember that we also have a responsibility to bring more justice into the world. Unlike the drought, which unearthed the lost and the unclaimed and the discarded, democracy cannot merely become the curious passion of an historian who wants to know our nation's roots, or a tourist trophy for the visitor who remembers what liberty once meant in its prime. Ever since Deuteronomy, our tradition has urged us to be active citizens. And as Jews, we return again and again to this teaching: justice, justice, shall you pursue. Justice, a foundation of liberty we assumed would always be ours, now needs to be pursued. Pursued because we have lost our moral compass when free and fair elections are under threat, whether through voter suppression, the refusal to accept the legitimacy of the vote, when election workers are harassed, when there is rampant misinformation. And let's not forget how often all of this is bound up with anti-Semitic tropes. According to Rabbi Michael G. Holtzman, creator of the Rebuilding Democracy Project, democracy requires both intention and deed. Our strength, our future as Jews, benefits from our own engagement in safeguarding democracy. 10 days ago was Democracy Day, a day to reflect on our collective support for representative, transparent governance, equality, respect for human rights and dignity, and the rule of law. 10 days from now, we'll gather again for Yom Kippur. And in the interim, let us ask ourselves, where have we come from? Where do we hope to go? And what do we hope to become? I believe that America is still a work in progress. And nothing could be more important to our future than the ancient imperative to pursue justice. Shana Tova.